Eric's last words shock everyone. After confessing the most devastating family truth. In a heartbreaking, high-stakes occasion of the bold and the beautiful, the glamour of the Forrester manse gives way to an atmosphere so heavy it feels nearly sacred, as the family gathers under one roof not for festivity but for commodity far more portentous, and at the center of it all is Eric Forrester, the primogenitor whose vision erected a fashion conglomerate and whose love sutured together generations, now frail but fiercely lucid, determined to speak before time robs him of the chance. The room is filled with familiar faces, Ridge standing rigid near the fireplace, Brooke clinging a towel she pretends she doesn't need, Donna swimming protectively at Eric's side, Steffi and Thomas swapping anxious ganders, indeed Hope moping in the doorway doubtful if she has the right to be present, because when Eric processed the family with urgency in his voice, no bone dares ignore it, and the silence that falls as he begins to speak is more nipping than any argument that has ever echoed through those walls. His breathing is labored but his eyes are clear, and he starts not with business, not with Forrester creations, but with remorse, confessing that for decades he carried a verity so painful he induced himself that silence was mercy, that guarding his children from the weight of it was an act of love, yet now he sees that the taradiddle, no matter how well-intentioned, fractured them more deeply than honesty ever could, and Ridge's jaw tightens because he senses this is about him, about the implied pressure that has defined his relationship with his father, about rumored dubieties and battles that no way completely healed. Eric reveals that time's agone. When Ridge's maternity was questioned, he learned information that could have shattered the family also and there, substantiation that suggested Ridge might not be his natural son, but rather of allowing the verity to crump everything. Eric chose to claim Ridge intimately without vacillation, not as an act of denial but as a deliberate protestation that motherhood is forged by devotion, not DNA. Yet in doing so he hid the full compass of the story, including the dubieties, the tests, the competitions, and the private heartache he endured alone. And as he confesses this now, Ridge's countenance cracks because the disclosure is that he might not partake Eric's blood. That scuttlebutt has visited him before but that Eric bore the burden in silence, absorbing the gossip, the legal pitfalls, the particular demotion, all to ensure Ridge would no way feel unwanted. Brooke's gashes fall freely because she understands what it means to have love, complicated by secrets, and Donna grips Eric's hand as if anchoring him to the present, while Steffi looks at her father with a mixture of shock and fierce fidelity, realizing the foundation of her own identity is pulsing. Eric continues, voice wavering yet bent, admitting that his topmost mistake was believing he alone could decide what trueness his family could handle, that by controlling the narrative he could control the damage, but secrets metastasize, he says, they transcend into every argument, every contest, every moment of instability, and he sees now how Ridge's lifelong need to prove himself, to dominate the company, to outmatch challengers and indeed his own siblings, was fueled by a mistrustfulness Eric inadvertently nurtured by no way completely explaining the storm he shielded him from. Thomas steps forward, asking hoarsely if this means their heritage is erected on query, and Eric answers that heritage is erected on choice, on showing up day after day, on loving indeed when it's inconvenient, and that Ridge is his son because he chose him and would choose him again 1,000 times, but the most ruinous verity is still to come, because Eric reveals that the original maternity results long assumed lost were in fact inconclusive due to a laboratory error he discovered times latterly, meaning the question of biology was no way definitively resolved, and he kept that knowledge hidden to help continuing injuries, effectively allowing the myth of certainty to persist while he lived with nebulosity. The room erupts in lapping voices, wrathfulness, unbelief, anguish, but Eric raises a pulsing hand and whispers that this isn't a concession meant to divide them. It's his final plea for them to understand that love isn't lowered by query, that identity isn't cancelled by defective wisdom, and that the true desolation would be allowing this disclosure to gash piecemeal what he fought to save. Ridge drops to his knees beside his father, eyes blazing with emotion, and says that none of it changes who Eric has been to him, that the man who tutored him to sketch, to lead, to forgive, is his father beyond any test result, and the vulnerability in his voice silences the room more effectively than any command. Brooke steps closer, recalling the innumerous times Eric acted as the family's moral compass indeed when he faltered tete, and Donna whispers that secrets kept out of love are still heavy monuments to carry alone, forgiving him indeed as her heart breaks. Steffi, ever realistic, asks what Eric wants them to do now, And he answers with his last coherent directive: cover each other, choose compassion over pride, stop weaponizing the history, and no way let mistrustfulness define them the way it defined him in quiet moments. His strength begins to fade, and as observers phone steadily in the background, because the family claimed on medical support despite Eric's disinclination, he looks at Ridge one final time and says that the only verity that matters is the life they erected together, that blood may explain origin but love defines heritage, and with those words, his voice softens into a tale that slightly carries across the room, yet lands like thunder in every heart present. The family closes in, forming a circle that feels both defensive and reverent, and in that fragile space old grievances dissolve, at least temporarily, as they realize that the primogenitor who sounded imperishable is simply a man who made amiss choices in hopeless attempts to keep his family complete. Whether Eric's concession becomes a catalyst for mending or a spark that reignites dormant conflicts remains uncertain, but in this moment, as Ridge clasps his father's hand and promises that the Forrester name will stand for consanity rather than division, the desolation of the secret is transcended by the raw humanity of the man who carried it, and the occasion ends not with dramatic music or explosive battle but with a quiet, intimate tableau of a family defying the complicated verity that love can be both guard and burden, that silence can be both protection and bane, and that occasionally the most shocking last words aren't allegations or curses but admissions of fear, remorse, and unconditional devotion that review everything the family allowed. They knew about themselves and about the man who led them for so numerous indelible times. The fate of Eric's concession on the bold and the beautiful doesn't explode all it formerly. Rather, it unfolds in swells, quiet, destabilizing swells that crash into each member of the Forrester family else, reshaping old recollections and reinterpreting long-settled arguments with a new, unsettling lens. The manse, once a symbol of certainty and heritage, now feels like a gallery of unanswered questions. Pictures lining the walls, family prints from fashion festivals, marriages, runway triumphs feel nearly accusatory, as though asking whether the foundation beneath those grins was ever as solid as it appeared. Ridge remains at Eric's bedside long after the others step down. The machines hum vocally, their mechanical meter differing sprucely with the chaos in Ridge's mind. He renewals every fight he ever had with his father, every blameworthiness that Eric favored someone differently, every time he stormed out of Forrester Creations' induced heat commodity to prove. Now, knowing that Eric carried query about his maternity while still defending him intimately, Ridge feels a strange weight of guilt. Not because he doubts who his father is but because he no way saw the silent immolation. Brooke watches from the doorway, her heart torn between admiration and apprehension. She has lived through further maternity exposures than utmost people could imagine, and she knows how destructive query can be when it seeps into the cracks of a family. She approaches Ridge precisely, placing a hand on his shoulder. For formerly there's no contest, no guard, only participated vulnerability. She tells him that identity isn't a lab result. It's erected in kitchens at night, in services filled with sketches, in arguments that end with remission. Ridge nods, but his silence speaks louder than words. He's recycling commodity primitive, the idea that his entire life has been framed by a question mark that Eric refused to let define him. Meanwhile, Steffi and Thomas retreat to the sundeck overlooking the megacity. The skyline glitters, indifferent to the emotional earthquake inside the manse. Thomas, ever impulsive, is furious. Not at Eric but at the macrocosm. He rails against the injustice of a laboratory error decreeing decades of mistrustfulness. Steffi still sees the bigger picture. She recognizes that their father's strength, the grim drive, the need to win was likely born from that retired insecurity. However, she says still, Granddad's secret explains Dad more than it changes him. If anything. Thomas considers this, his wrathfulness softening into contemplation. Donna refuses to leave Eric's side. Her love for him has always been unconditional, nearly recalcitrant in its devotion. She skirmishes his hair back gently, brooding solace indeed when he cannot respond. In her heart, she knows that Eric's concession wasn't about clearing his heart. It was about freeing his family from the unnoticeable chains of secretiveness. She recalls the nights he'd gawk out the window lost in study, and now she understands what visited him. She forgives him, not because he was right to hide the verity, but because she knows the fear that drove him. At Forrester Creations, news of Eric's condition spread snappily. The design bottom, generally buzzing with creative energy, feels restrained. Workers who have worked under Eric for decades partake hushed exchanges about his leadership, his liberality, his unvarying belief in art over profit. Carter steps into the administrative office, gaping at the president that suddenly seems too large and too empty. He wonders what this disclosure means for the company's future. However, will challengers use this to undermine the Forrester brand? Will shareholders horrify? The business counteraccusations impend large, but Carter knows that now isn't the time for commercial strategy, it is a time for consinity. If Ridge's identity was formerly questioned, Hope grapples with her own internal storm. As someone who has frequently felt like a stranger within the Forrester dynasty, she empathizes with Ridge's retired struggle further than anyone realizes. She seeks him out, offering quiet support. Their discussion is tender, stripped of once pressures. Hope admits that growing up with complicated lineage tutored her that family is defined by who stays. Ridge listens, and for the first time in times, he allows himself to lean on someone without posturing. As hours pass, Eric regains brief simplicity. The family gathers again, artificially forming a circle around him. His voice is faint but determined. He asks them not to let attorneys, intelligencers, or gossip columnists twist his concession into reproach. He reminds them that the Forrester name was erected not on perfection, but on resilience. However, he whispers, "You doan't discard the garment, you mend it, if there's a excrescence in the stitching." The conceit is classic Eric, and it draws a bittersweet smile from everyone present. Ridge takes a deep breath and makes a public oath in front of the family. He declares that anyhow of biology, he'll recognize Eric's heritage by leading with integrity, not instability. He promises to end the cycle of contests that has agonized the family for times. Thomas and Steffi exchange surprised ganders. Similar modesty from their father is rare, but they see sincerity in his eyes. Outside, word begins to blunder. A tabloid journalist catches wind of a Forrester family stunner. The trouble of media delirium looms, hanging to turn a deeply particular concession into caption fodder. Brooke, seasoned by decades of public scrutiny, incontinently strategizes. She suggests controlling the narrative, maybe a precisely drafted statement emphasizing love and consinity rather than query. Carter agrees, formerly drafting language that protects both Eric's quality and the company's stability. In the quiet of the night, Ridge sits alone in the design plant. He pulls out one of Eric's old sketchbooks, flipping through runners filled with bold lines and dateless outlines. He realizes that these designs, this art, are his true heritage. Whether or not they partake DNA, they partake vision. And that consummation grounds him. Back at the manse, Donna senses a shift in Eric's breathing. The room tenses, every family member bracing for the ineluctable. But rather of fading incontinently, Eric opens his eyes one last time. He looks at each of them designedly, as if learning their faces. "No further secrets," he murmurs. "Promise me." One by one they nod. It's a simple request, yet it carries the weight of generations. As dawn breaks over Los Angeles, the family stands together. Not as shattered rivals but as a united front. The query about Ridge's maternity remains undetermined scientifically, but emotionally, commodity has formed. The desolation of Eric's concession has given way to clarity. Love chosen is more important than blood assumed. In the days that follow, the Forresters make a collaborative decision not to pursue farther testing. The nebulosity, once a source of fear, becomes nearly sacred, a memorial that certainty isn't always necessary for belonging. Ridge intimately honors Eric in a moving speech at Forrester Creations, crediting him not only as a father, but as a tutor and moral compass. The speech resonates deeply, quelling implicit reproach and buttressing the brand's image of strength through vulnerability. Yet the impact of Eric's last words lingers. Each family member carries it else. Thomas channels it into renewed fidelity to his craft. Steffi becomes more defensive of her children, determined to shield them from analogous dubieties. Brooke softens, choosing conciliation over contest in moments where she formerly would have fought. And Donna, standing in the quiet fate, understands that Eric's topmost gift wasn't the conglomerate he erected, but the courage he set up at the end, to admit fault, to confess fear, and to review heritage not as an unbroken line of blood, but as an unbroken chain of love. The occasion closes with a final montage: Ridge sketching in the early morning light, Steffi embracing her children, Thomas conforming a mannequin with focused perfection, Brooke gaping courteously at a family portrayal, Donna placing Eric's favorite pen on his office. The camera lingers on the Forrester manse, bathed in daylight, emblematizing renewal rather than ruin. Eric's last words may have shocked everyone, but they also liberated them. In revealing the most ruinous family verity, he disassembled the vision that perfection sustains a dynasty. Rather, he proved that vulnerability does. And in doing so, he assured that the Forrester heritage, complex, defective, fiercely loving, would endure not because it was unquestioned, but because it was chosen again and again, by every member of the family who understood at last that belonging isn't proven in a laboratory, but lived in every act of devotion. The following days at the Forrester manse are filled with a tense mixture of mourning, reflection, and subtle realignments of fidelity. Eric's concession has left an endless imprint, not only on the psyche of the family but on the very atmosphere of the home. Hallways that formerly reverberated with horselaugh, ambition, and occasional bickering now feel hushed, heavy with the weight of a participated, implied understanding. Each room holds echoes of the primogenitor's words. Heritage is erected on choice, not certainty. Those words play in the minds of Ridge, Steffi, Thomas, Brooke, and Donna like a mantra, a creepy chorus that demands a reckoning with both past conduct and unborn intentions. Ridge, in particular, is converted in ways subtle and profound. He spends long hours in the design plant, poring over sketches left by Eric, tracing the lines and angles that formerly defined the man's genius. The sketches are further than fashion. They are Eric's fingerprints on the soul of Forrester creations. Ridge now views them not as competition but as heritage. Sluggishly, a sense of purpose emerges alongside grief. He recognizes the duality of his father, a man of extraordinary vision, yet deeply mortal, defective, and burdened with secretiveness. This understanding tempers Ridge's usual fiery tendencies. He no longer feels the coercion to dominate at all costs, fating that leadership is as important about empathy and restraint as it's about brilliance and authority. Steffi, meanwhile, is scuffling with a different kind of internal recalibration. Having always doted her father in certain felicitations, she's forced to defy the complexity of mortal morality in real terms. Eric's choice to hide the maternity nebulosity was, she realizes, not born of malignancy or weakness, but of love and fear. This disclosure reshapes her relationship with her own children. She vows to nurture them in ways that prioritize honesty and emotional safety over pride or appearances. In quiet moments, she sits with her youthful, holding them near, reflecting on how fragile family trust can be, and how fluently secretiveness, indeed when well-intentioned, can produce fractures that echo across generations. Thomas, ever impulsive, originally resists the notion of forgiving Eric completely. He's still stewing with wrathfulness, not at his father, but at the times of query, the subtle pressures that Eric's silence eternalized, and the ripple effect of instability that has told his own choices. Yet as he watches Ridge's regular approach to recognizing Eric's heritage, he begins to perceive a path forward. Maybe the family can pivot from preoccupation with perfection to a more flexible, mortal-focused understanding of what makes them strong. Sluggishly, Thomas channels his restlessness into creative trials, using fashion as both catharsis and homage. His designs come bolder, more emotionally raw, inspired by the vulnerabilities Eric revealed, rather than constrained by the pressures of the boardroom or public opinion. Brooke, observing all of this, finds herself in an unusual position. She has always been a middleman, frequently walking the tightrope between Ridge's intensity, Eric's authority, and the volatility of the extended family. With Eric's absence more palpable than ever, she becomes both anchor and voice of reason. Yet, she must also grapple with her own complex feelings. For decades, she has defined herself incompletely in opposition to the men she loves, frequently serving as the keeper of verity or the secret revealer. Eric's concession forces her to defy her own conspiracy and secretiveness, the times when she withheld uncomfortable trueness or allowed her instincts to guide action over translucency. In quiet reflection, she begins to journal, writing letters she may no way shoot, trying to make sense of the simple vestments of love, fidelity, and deception that define the Forrester family. Donna's part remains both stabilizing and intimate. She oscillates between active engagement with the family and solitary moments at Eric's bedside, speaking vocally to him indeed when he's unresponsive. In her heart, she understands that his final act, revealing the maternity nebulosity, was meant to liberate them from the chains of perfectionism and undetermined dubitation. She also recognizes that heritage is further than material heritage. It's ethical, emotional, and profoundly relational. To recognize Eric, she begins to cultivate deeper, more purposeful connections with each family member, offering guidance, support, and occasionally gentle admonishment when pride or guard threatens to dominate discussion. Her presence becomes a quiet, yet important, tenacious for a family teetering between grief and growth. The wider Forrester macrocosm also feels the shockwaves of Eric's last concession.